Hi, I'm Len Epp from Leanpub, and in this Leanpub podcast, I'll be interviewing Amir Rajan. Amir is a Dallas, Texas-based indie game developer and independent software consultant who's experienced working with a number of platforms and languages. Amir also works on several open-source projects and speaks at conferences and user groups, and he blogs at amirrajan.net. He's best known for developing the iOS app for the popular text-based game A Dark Room, which was originally created for the browser by Michael Townsend. Amir's app hit #1 in the App Store and has been downloaded over 2.5 million times. You can follow him on Twitter at Amir Rajan. Amir is the author of the Leanpub book, Surviving the App Store, How to Succeed as an Indie Developer, which is a very well-titled book. It's full of lots of great tips and a really, I think, very practical and valuable approach to helping people get started in game development for the App Store. In this interview, we're going to talk about Amir's professional interests, his books, his experiences using Leanpub, and ways we can improve Leanpub for him and for other authors at the very end. So thanks, Amir, for being on the Leanpub podcast.
No problem. It's a pleasure. Absolute pleasure.
So I always start these interviews by asking people for their origin story. So I was wondering if you could tell me how you first got interested in coding and being a developer, and how you ended up being a game developer and working on A Dark Room.
Yeah. So I guess a lot of people should be able to relate a little bit to the story. I learned how to build software through just building video games. So I think my first thing was I tried to build a chessboard with the Knights Tour. So I think I was a sophomore in high school at that point in time. And I had Turbo C++, and I was like, I want to, try to build chess. Pro tip, when you're just starting to get into game development or any kind of development, chess is probably one of the most harder problems you can pick up. But I got my first computer when I was 10 years old. It was a 386 with the turbo button. I played games on there like Scorched Earth. That was one of my first games that I remember. And then I had Chessmaster 3000, and that's what really got me into just being around video games. And I had the Sega Saturn. I mean, the Sega, the NES, the Atari. So I just grew up with that. And then I just did my thing in high school. Found that I really liked programming, and got a degree at University of Texas at Dallas doing software, computer science, and software engineering. And during that time period, I just finished my degree out, and then just went into the corporate world because I guess that's what you're supposed to do, right? You have all these dreams and aspirations of, I'm gonna, build video games and all that stuff, and then reality hits and it's like, well, I actually have to make money, and I became a software developer at that point. So I did that for 8 years, and then I went on a sabbatical and kind of saved up enough money to just take some time off. Downsized from a 2-bedroom apartment to 1-bedroom. My wife was okay with it. Our standard of living really didn't change because I made sure to have that really solid, foundation. I took some time off, and A Dark Room was kind of like, hey, I want to, do iOS development, kind of learn the platform. And this is a really easy, minimalist, text-based RPG that I can port over. It wasn't, but it starts out really simple, and then it becomes really intricate. But I kind of just did that, and I ported it. I was really happy with it. I put it in the App Store. And then I kind of became obsessed with the marketing aspect of it and kind of building a user base and, kind of watching my baby grow. And it went viral. And I guess that's all she wrote, right? After that, I was able to. Recently, I went to, got a new physician, and on the sheet they make you fill out, it says occupation. I was able to put down game developer, and that was a very pinnacle moment for me that I could stop calling myself a software engineer or a software consultant and call myself a game developer. And it's so fun because you'll be part of conversations. And before it was like, well, so what do you do? And I would say, oh, I'm a software developer or software engineer. And then that's kind of where it stopped, right? Because they're like, what does that mean? And my wife would be the same thing. Someone asks her, what does your husband do? And she goes, I don't know. I think he does something with computers. And you always get that thing. It's like, hey, I got this computer problem. My internet's not working or something. But yeah, so now when I talk with people, it's like, oh yeah, I'm a game developer. And it completely breaks the ice, and you can start talking about really cool things from that point.
That's a fantastic story, and I got to say, I can in a very strange way, I can actually sympathize because my first kind of corporate job was working for a company that's now called Dealogic in London, and it was doing research on mergers and acquisitions, basically. And but the company at the time was called Computasoft.
Okay.
And all I had to do was say that name, and people like glazed over, not interested.
Yeah,
it was just amazing.
Care.
Yeah, like if the word went, you don't even need full computer in it. Like it's just
and it's so interesting. They have you start talking about, oh, I do software development or programming, and like, oh, so you're in IT. I hear that's not a great industry to be in. Like suddenly they know everything about IT, and they can just group it into this like one umbrella of a discipline, I guess.
Yeah, it's actually, I don't know if this is a tangent, but it's actually a very interesting big topic and very important, I think. For example, there was a recent exchange I saw on Twitter where some, I think, relatively prominent journalist based in New York tweeted about, I think the guy's the co-founder of Vox.
Okay.
And he had written a Medium post about, the digital publishing, basically. And then this guy had sent out a tweet saying, like, how can this guy, a tech administrator, talk about digital media? To which, of course, he sort of had a really snarky reply, and like, Mark Andreessen retweeted it saying, "What's a tech administrator?" Ironically,
right.
And I actually replied to that with an image from Peter Thiel's book of the Solyndra guy next to Elon Musk.
I gotta
and there's like the tech administrator guy on the right? But like, there's a weird preoccupation that people who I think are unfamiliar with software have, where it's kind of scary to them, right? Because the guy who knows or the person who knows how the computers go actually, runs everything, and knows how everything works. And it's very unsettling, I think, to people who aren't familiar with software, but sort of have a prominent position from a kind of legacy institutional structure. So they take the opportunity to sort of goad the new media guy for actually knowing how the computers go, as though that's somehow evidence that he doesn't understand the real work of publishing.
Yeah, and and I can empathize from that too. It's like when my car breaks down, or at least originally, I take it to the mechanic, and he's like, "Yeah, you got this and this wrong," and if you feel so disenfranchised, right? That this person kind of has the upper hand. At least, I mean, you got to trust him and have that kind of rapport. So it's frustrating. I hope in the future more people are, I guess, more literate at manipulating a general computing machine, right, and doing something with that. But I guess that'll just come with time. I think by extension, I think game development does a really good job of that. Because when I released ADR to iOS, I've had like teenagers email me saying, "I want to get into game development. Like this is one of the first games where I really enjoyed it, and I saw that you don't have to have crazy graphics or like 3D models or anything to actually build something that people will enjoy playing." And they could visualize that I can create a button, like I can put some text on a screen. These aren't difficult things. I mean, they're familiar to some extent. And that's what kind of got him into game development. I had people actually email me, "Oh, here's this like Python console-based game that I built, and it's so awesome. I just play. It's like, oh, this is the coolest thing in the world." And to be able to inspire people from that perspective has been pretty fun.
Yeah, well, it's got to be really rewarding to like sort of have a community built around it, and to have people emailing you with their creations. I mean, and to be able to be a game developer yourself and create things. I had a question. You brought up your sabbatical, and I found that really interesting. I was wondering, have your employers since then cared about you taking a sabbatical? Is it something that they ask questions about, or is it like they're just not relevant? You're a good developer, and that's it.
Yeah, so for me, the sabbatical was actually a learning sabbatical. So I was primarily a .NET C# developer. And during that, I guess, I would say 14, 15 months off, I ramped up on a whole lot of tech. So became really proficient with iOS. I did a lot of Ruby development, I guess, primarily for build automation. So I got into Ruby. I say I'm a Rubyist because I got into Ruby using Rake to build .NET projects. And that was like a really, usually you hear Ruby developers, oh, I did Rails, but I have very little Rails experience. All my Ruby experiences is through building iOS games and actually doing build automation for .NET. But during that sabbatical, I ramped up on so much stuff. Node, Angular. I did a lot of Knockout back in the day too. So JavaScript, a lot of runtime things. I finally went into my OS X like partition. So I had a Mac, but I always used Boot Camp, and that's what I would. I love the device, the system itself. I just never used the Mac partition, so this was like an opportunity for me to do that. So when I talk with employers, and I say, well, I took a 2-year sabbatical to really ramp up on other technologies, and kind of sell myself as an integration specialist. So not only do I know .NET, I know Rails, I know Node, I can do QA stuff, I can do mobile development, so I can speak a lot of different languages with regards to real languages, right? Interacting with humans. And the fact that I created a product, it makes me a little bit more able to communicate with the business end, say like, I understand that you've got these limitations or you've got these things that you're trying to accomplish, and let's see if I can figure something out for you. So it's worked out pretty well for me. The other side is that I've kind of become unemployable from that perspective too, because you start valuing your time so much more. You kind of realize that, wow, 9 to 5 on a salary is leaves very little for, I guess, the person from some perspective, especially with the market as it is today. I think taking the plunge and taking the risk, maybe doing independent work, maybe doing having some kind of side hustle is so valuable. And I think, usually some employers are like, what do you mean you don't want to go salary? Or what do you mean you don't want to work 40 hours a week? And it's just kind of weird for them hearing that from a potential person. But yeah, I do contract work part-time. So I'll do 6 months of contract work, and then when I get the itch to actually do game development, I'll go back to game development and go back to contract work and flip-flop. If I find a really interesting project, I might do a year contract, or if I want to do game development. Right now I'm in the game development phase. I've kind of laid out my next 8 months, and that's what I'm going to do. And then hopefully, and then go back to quote unquote contracting afterwards.
Yeah, that's a really great story, and it sounds like a pretty cool position to have built for yourself. I was wondering, this is actually not sort of specific to you, but one thing, I've been interviewing Leanpub authors for a while now, and they're mostly developers or involved with software in one way or another. And one thing I've noticed is that about half studied computer science and half didn't.
That's interesting.
Yeah, and so one question I'd like to ask you is, I think you graduated about 10 years ago?
December of 06.
Okay.
Yep.
If you, knowing what you know now, if you were talking to you about to graduate from high school, would you recommend studying computer science?
I think personally I needed that structure, and I loved programming from the get-go. And I think around 2001, emphasis on having the computer science degree was much heavier. Especially, you didn't have a public portfolio, right? GitHub didn't exist. You couldn't publish something to an app store, right? I think in this day and age, if someone was like, "Oh, I want to get into computer science and programming," the first thing I would ask them is, "Well, do you have an app, or show me your website?" Or because it's so much more accessible these days. So I think if I was the graduate high school now, I think my answer would have been build something, get something out there, and show me what you made. And it's kind of weird because you have some more formal professions like nursing or accounting or business that I think you really need to have that really strong fundamentals that are taught in college. At least for the kind of software that I build, you can hack a lot of things together and get away with it, right? If I was really interested maybe in like compiler design or distributed systems or like network protocols, I don't think I could get away without having a formalized education. But at least for the business apps that I build, the credit apps, product pages, games, you could probably get away with just building something and then just being hungry from that perspective.
Yeah, it's really interesting. One person I interviewed recently said, who's in software testing, said that he would still take 4 years to study and build things, but he wouldn't do it at university. So it's like this concept of taking a chunk of time at the beginning of your career that you devote to specifically kind of to becoming something that you're not yet. Is still an important phase to go through. Yeah,
recording. I think another important thing is to just document that in some way to show to people. So when they say, "Oh, you don't have a degree," it's like, well, I have 10 apps in the App Store, or I built these websites, or I bootstrapped this company, or I helped this mom and pop shop set up a checkout center. And all those things perk up your ears, especially from a junior dev when you hear that kind of stuff.
It's really turning to a dark room, or ADR as you call it. So one of the things, there's so much to talk about. It's been written about on Huffington Post and New Yorker and stuff like that. And you've got this great post on Reddit as well, where you talk about what you did, in addition to your book, of course, which we'll get to in a bit. But I wanted to ask you, there's a really interesting feature of your success with the game, which is that there's no kind of reason you can attribute to its taking off. It just, as you said at the beginning, it just went viral. And I was thinking about it's interesting because, like, playing a dark room, unexplained things just suddenly happen and kind of change the game for you, right? And I was just wondering if you wouldn't mind talking a little bit about what's that experience like when, like, you worked on something, it's been out there for a while, and then inexplicably it's suddenly a hit. What's that like?
So the short version is you're not prepared for it. I don't think anything I've done in my life could have prepared me for getting 20,000 downloads a day for effectively a little bit over 2 weeks. You wake up in the morning and you see, because you can go to iTunes Connect and see how many downloads, and you hit the number one spot. You're like, oh, 20,000 downloads. Like, I'm going to get a 6-figure check from Apple this month. And it's surreal. I lost sleep when it went viral at the end of March in the UK, and I have some ideas about how some of the virality occurred, but it went viral in the UK at the end of March, and then it took 12 days for it to go viral in the US, and then it stayed there for 18 days, and it finally fell from the number one spot. I did a release, and then it went to the number one spot again for 2 more days. So during that time period, I didn't sleep. It's really difficult to put into words.
What made it? Can you maybe explain a little bit about, like, how did your day change? Like, were you getting inundated with messages from people and, like, requests from the media? And
so the requests from the media came when I hit the number one spot. That's when like Huffington Post, the New Yorker, and those people started contacting me. And of course, you say yes to everything because you're like, yes, I want to try to push this train as long as I can. And then you kind of wait. Yeah, for me, I actually wrote it in the book as an analogy. It's like you buy a lottery ticket, and you're watching the TV, and they give you 5 of the 6 numbers, and all 5 of the numbers are correct. So you might make some money, right? You're like, all right, I've got this much in the bank, great. But that 6th number is where your life changes, right? It's where you don't have to worry about that kind of stuff anymore. And the TV cuts off on the 6th number, and you have to wait for some other media outlet to tell you what that 6th number was. And for me, during that time period, I do the math, and I say, okay, this app needs to stay at the number one spot for 62 days, and I never have to worry about money again. Obviously, that didn't happen, but for that 18-day period, that's kind of what I was mentally going through. And just to stay grounded and to say realistic and say, this is gonna end, or this may not happen. It's a mental. It takes mental effort to not get away with yourself. And every moment, like every 3 minutes, I was checking the App Store. Am I still number one? Am I still number one? Am I still number one? So that doesn't go away. That didn't go away during that time period. And at the number one spot, I got about 300 reviews a day. So just reading the reviews, it was nice. That it gave me something to do while I'm toiling away going, oh gosh, what's going to happen? You can't release a new version of your game because you don't want to lose your reviews and you don't want to rock the boat, right? So I'm kind of like in this limbo going, okay, I can't release a new version. I can't make any changes. There's bugs that have been found and I can't do anything about that. So I'm gonna just read reviews and refresh the App Store page because I have nothing better to do with my time right now. So it's kind of like that kind of feeling.
Yeah, I've got actually maybe a kind of specific question, but you refer to negative reviews in your Reddit post, and was wondering. I mean, just thinking about it generally, that nowadays with social media and stuff, when you become well known for any reason, it seems to me everyone just suddenly encounters negativity. That's just a feature of the experience, and I was wondering if that happened to you. Did you encounter people saying this is a fraud or this is BS or anything like that? Obviously, totally falsely.
Yes.
But what was your experience like with that? And did you do anything specific to deal with it?
Yeah, that was it's so negativity is like death in taxes. You're going to get it, especially when you're in the limelight and you've got that big target on your back. So what happened in the UK actually was that. So the UK market is, I would probably say, a fifth of the US market. So hitting the number one spot in the US took 20,000 downloads. Hitting the number one spot in the UK took about 5,000. So, and coincidentally, getting above the fold, like the top 10 games, is significantly less also, right? So in the US, it probably takes about 4,000 to 5,000 downloads to get to the number 10 spot in games. In the UK, it was only like 900 downloads to get there. So what happened was I got to the 900 downloads and I was above the fold, and that's what slingshotted me up to the number one spot in the UK. And up until that time period, my target category was RPGs. So the reviews were generally good because people wanted a RPG and they downloaded an RPG and that's what they expected. But suddenly I'm in the top 10 games with like real games. You have Minecraft just like above me and I'm like, what's going on here? And people, it changes. Suddenly someone downloads their game that's looking for, I don't know, like just a regular arcade game. And they're like, what is this crap? How did this get here? So they left one-star reviews. And the interesting thing with the review system is that the way the reviews are sorted, it's by the number of stars and then by length. But you hit some kind of threshold where the length becomes more of a factor in the review. So I got a few people leave like these really long one-star rants, and they became the top reviews on ADR's page. And then it kind of created this herd mentality. So suddenly people that would download this game had this negative connotation to the game already going into it. They'd play it for a minute and go, this is stupid. Everyone's right. And then they would leave their one-star rants. And it kind of snowballed. It got to the point where about 33% of my reviews were one-star reviews. And that initially, that was really rough. Like I would go on Twitter and search for people talking about a dark room and like try to directly address their issues, saying like, look, this is a real game, I promise. Look at all the things I've done. Look at my blog. This is not a fake scam game. But I think in retrospect, it's just you get used to it. There's going to be people that hate on like even the Reddit posts, the 2 Reddit posts that I did. There were comments on there was like, oh, this guy's just doing marketing for his own game, even though there was like a lot of good content. And then there was another one where it was like, why are you shilling your game out? You've already made $800,000 or $700,000. Why do you have to shill your game? And it's you lose either way, right? Because if I made my stuff anonymous and said I'm not going to tell you the name of my game, then I would have gotten negative comments saying that I don't believe you. You're just blowing smoke up our skirts with regards to what you've done. So you lose either way. And I think with regards to coping, you just get kind of used to it. So after the first drove of negative reviews, I found that I was still getting positive reviews, and you just get used to it, and it kind of rolls off your back.
That's a really interesting story. One thing is, so for example, you say that you even got negativity about posting these long, really helpful, detailed like pieces of advice for people to succeed in the App Store. And even then you get negativity. But what also happens is, I saw someone had tweeted about it, and then a guy I mentioned him already, but Mark Andreessen retweeted it, right? And I haven't had experience with, success in the App Store or anything like that. But one thing I've just remarked is that if you succeed genuinely, all the smart people see that.
Yeah.
And so the negativity is coming from, I won't no reason to say the negative term, right? But it's coming from not those people.
Right.
And then that's one way, at least I've found, of sort of dealing with it, is like, well, look, like there are some people who are just not reachable. And that's what that person is. And instead of, if they've got a problem, the reason they're negative in the way they're negative in the first place is because they've got some kind of underlying problem. And so thinking about it that way, it's like, oh, well, I can't solve their problems for them, right? This isn't my problem. This is their problem. And anyway, I find that sort of helps.
And another thing that I think that helped quite a bit for me was I try to practice empathy. So that was something. It's funny because I was like 28 when I started the sabbatical, and I turned 30. And I don't know, like something clicks in your head. You suddenly stay young but become more mature from that perspective. So I think back to my even 27, 20. I was like, man, I was an idiot and an asshole back then. And then you grow older and you're like, I can do better at just being more empathetic. So you see some of the negative reviews and you got to just think to yourself, like, man, they might be having a bad day, or they might have tried doing the same thing I did and really really struggled with it and are just have some of that resentment that came from their own struggles. So there's no telling what they could be going through in their life, and I think that really helped also to kind of ease that.
That's interesting. That's another sort of conclusion I've come to about dealing with people, through a product, right? Is that you don't know what their day's been like. You don't know if they're at a bad point in their life.
Right.
You just really don't know anything about them. And so someone who's relating to you negatively, you become a lot more empathetic. And one thing I've also found too is that treating everybody uniformly in a friendly manner.
Yeah.
If you have a negative, if there's a negative interaction and you come back with that empathy, almost every time you actually get an apology. I think that might be a little bit different on Twitter because Twitter is so short form.
Yeah, the brevity, it just leads to.
Yeah, but it's definitely like dealing with people over email. Like that's been my experience in a number of projects. Is that if someone they just maybe they just skip lunch, and then sort of again it's sort of another version of like their issue is their issue, not mine, is a way of coping with it. What about on the other side of things, I guess, what about the positivity? I mean, you must have been elated, and it must have been different, having people, like you said, people contact you like, hey, here's my game. And what was that like? Did you have any kind of imposter syndrome kind of thing happen?
I've struggled with imposter syndrome, period. Right. It's like a part of me is, even with the new games that I build, I'm like, I can't top a dark room. I got the prequel out there. I've got for those that have read Flatland by Edwin Abbott. It's like it's on the Gutenberg project. If you haven't read it, it's about 80-page book, and it's about a two-dimensional shape that lives in a two-dimensional world. And it's actually a satire around the age of Versailles, so the Versailles time period. And it's told from the perspective of a mathematician and how this civilization interacts with each other and how women are treated and how different caste systems are created within this two-dimensional world. But I built a game around that, and that's like my third game that I'm building. And I try desperately to say I need to get out of the shadow of a dark room because I need to prove myself that this wasn't just like a one-shot wonder at this point, a one-hit wonder. So I struggle with that, imposter syndrome all the time. But man, the emails, a lot of that stuff, it is the most rewarding thing I've ever experienced. I've done a lot of open source, especially during my corporate time, and you get occasional like thank yous and we really appreciate what you're doing and stuff. But you get the emails. I've gotten emails with people saying, like, I loved the game. I mean, I loved your game. I want to get into game development. But I actually got reviews in the App Store. There was one review on a Noble, and the reason I mentioned a Noble Circle was because it was on that review. Was he was like the review said, today was like my 17th birthday, and I don't think I would have made it past today if it wasn't for this game. So it's like, how do you internalize that you could have he was on the verge of saying like I was going to end my life, and this game kept me from doing that. And when you see reviews like that, it just really puts things into perspective that you could potentially be changing someone's life. The same thing with another thing with the Dark Room is that it's actually playable via voiceover, so people that are blind can actually play the game. And it hit the #1 spot, and I got an email from a brother who's saying like, "Hey man, I really appreciated that you made the game accessible to the blind, because my sister now at school can actually talk about the game with her friends, and she doesn't feel left out around that kind of stuff." So those kind of things, I hate talking about it, bragging about it. I feel like I'm bragging about it, but those kind of things are just immensely rewarding, and it's just, you can't put a price tag on that kind of stuff. And it's been humbling, really humbling from that perspective. And from what you were saying with being genuine, and I try my best, absolute best, to be genuine with all my interactions and whatnot, and hopefully that shows through with whenever I write or talk, or even in my games. I hope that shows through.
Yeah, well, I mean, I certainly think it does. Especially, I mean, and this is something I've got a kind of a particular little hobby horse about. There's often when someone has had a success and they're asked about it, the story ends up being, well, I was working in the movie store and then I was directing Reservoir Dogs.
Right.
And actually knowing like how did, and actually that's kind of like, it's not the best example because Tarantino actually has explained how that happened in detail. But often, people will tell their story about how they became a success, and then you'll think back on it like, hey, wait a minute, there's this huge gap. But what you've done is you've filled in that gap. And there's a sort of really humorous moment at the beginning of your Leanpub book where you talk about how like there's so many questions to ask, like what should my stack be, what should blah 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 when I'm getting into developing an iOS app. And then you go, well, there are lots of things to choose from, but here's one answer, and you just list a place to start.
Right.
And that is actually like, the joke is that it ought to be so obvious that people should do this.
Right.
But most people don't. It's really interesting that people just like, they're just like, when you're desperate and you're starting out, you're just like, just tell me what steps 1 and 2 are, and then
right.
I can move on. But if I have to know what I'm doing before I start, right, then I'll never start.
Right.
And anyway, and like I sort of noticed, like, between your book and your Reddit posts and stuff like that, like you're obviously like trying to give people that.
I think my dog is whining. Can you hear me?
Yeah, that's okay.
I'll move him down.
Yeah, but you're giving people that equipment right away, right? Mm-hmm. Which is very generous and certainly something no one has to do. You've mentioned a noble circle a couple of times, one of your games, and I noticed that you've written about that too, and you were publishing it while it was in progress, right? So the first version was kind of, as you say, sort of barely playable.
Right.
And I know that there are in-progress games on Steam, or from what I hear. And, it's interesting because, Leanpub, we're into in-progress book publishing. Even Kanye West is getting in the game. He was in progress publishing a song. Mm-hmm. And I've never asked someone who's done this with a game before what that process is like. Do you get a lot of feedback from people? Do you have a plan for your releases where like it's kind of like you sort of set up a surprise release in advance, or what's it like in progress publishing a game?
Yeah, I think I guess I just kind of realized this idea of incremental development, and this kind of goes back to my corporate experience, because I don't want to say that my corporate experience wasn't helpful to me, but during my corporate work, you get all the like agile, big A agile stuff and everything, and it helped because I understood what it meant to actually incrementally build something. And there's so much pressure for game developers to have like this phenomenally perfect release, but we have these facilities to allow us to release incrementally. So why aren't we using them? So that was kind of the idea that I had with the Noble Circle. And so my first version was barely playable, and I made it free. And I was like, here, this game's barely playable. I'm going to put it out there. And then I put a bit of developer commentary at the end saying that, look, the App Store's broken, or I think it's broken. We have a lot of ads, we have a lot of in-app purchases, and everyone's going for this cash grab without really taking into consideration that, you may not need to do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to release a game, and I promise to update it at least monthly. And you'll see these updates come through. And if you buy it now, or if you get it now, you get it for free. And eventually it's going to cost money. But right now, I think I don't feel it's worth money. So just take this journey with me. And not only are you going to get a completed product, but you're going to see the story of how I got there. And that's been really great. You get negative feedback saying like, the jump mechanic's stupid or things like that. I listen to that and incorporate it. But then you have people that say, yes, there's another update. I can't wait to try it out and kind of see what he did differently, or, what kind of changes did he make. And they love that aspect of it because they replay the game and go, oh yeah, he added this new thing, or I like the change that he made there, or he added a new chapter. And it's wonderful. It's still not done, but I'm charging $1 for it now. And I released a free version that's a Noble Circle prologue that kind of had that initial experience, a much more polished version of that initial experience. And then there's an interstitial to say, here's what I think is wrong. Here's what I'm trying differently. Go buy my other game, or go buy the full version if you want to continue the story. And I hear game developers say, oh, I'm going to start a Kickstarter, but I kind of quasi did that myself. I just did my Kickstarter in the App Store and said, if you like what I did here, buy the full version, buy a dark room, buy the ensign. You have different options there. And if you didn't, no problem. I mean, you didn't lose anything. Hopefully you played a little bit of it, and maybe you can give me some feedback on that. But generally speaking, all the reviews have been very positive. And this approach has been really exciting for the end user and for me too, because I just enjoy doing it.
It's interesting. I actually don't know the answer to this question, but can you get refunds in the App Store?
You can. So it's tricky, right? They don't advertise it, but on the receipt that you get, it'll say, you've purchased this game, and there's two links. You can gift the game to someone, and you can report a problem with the app. So if you click the report a problem button, you can actually get a refund, and there's a drop-down list of why you wanted to get a refund. So you can say, oh, I accidentally bought it, or it wasn't what I expected it to be, or whatever. And generally speaking, they do give the refund, but it's kind of like they don't advertise. They say all sales are final, no refunds. But you can get a refund if you go through that process. That's
really interesting because as you pointed out, there's all these tools to kind of publish incrementally, right? And like whether that can be various types of products, but especially obviously suited to digital products, right? And so I have this view that we're kind of like, we are sort of working out what commerce is like around things that aren't finished.
Yeah, and that's kind of like why I like Leanpub too, from that perspective. Was just, man, I can put something out there. I've written, and that's how it kind of started. Was I had the blog entry and I had all this blog information in there, but it was kind of I took the first step was take that blog, put it in the book, and then write a post-mortem on all the post-mortems that I wrote, and that worked out really well and got some, because I could reflect back and say, oh, during this time period, I thought that this was the problem, but this was really what was happening during that time period. So sorry to cut you off, but I just want
to No, that's great. Yeah, no, and actually I have a couple of questions about that that I'll ask in a couple of minutes. But yeah, the theory that I have at least is that especially if let's say a digital good is published in progress, but also kind of self-published, right, where there isn't what you call like a AAA company or something like that behind it, that putting forward the fact that it's easy to get a refund actually is a very important step in establishing that relationship, that positive relationship between kind of the person who's buying the thing and the person who's making the thing, because then you can kind of, there's this positivity and this openness to it right from the start, which is like, we trust you, right? Is actually your first encounter with us is us trusting you and asking you to place some trust on us, right? That like, you've released something early and unfinished, but I'm trusting you that it's, that you're going to do what you say you're going to do, and that, all that kind of thing. And I think that actually, yeah, like my theory is that surfacing the ability to easily get a refund for a product you can download actually drives sales, especially in the long run.
Yeah. And I think, and it's, you see the other side of that coin. I try not to, obviously try not to worry about it. But there was an indie game development company that built a game called Firewatcher. It's on Steam right now. Like if you haven't played Firewatcher, Definitely, you can get it on PS4. You can get it on Steam. I don't know if it's on Xbox One, but it's a the thing is they call it a walking simulator. So you're basically this guy that's in Yosemite National or Yellowstone. Yeah, it's Yellowstone National Park, and you're basically making sure that there's no forest fires. But there's this whole story and this relationship that you build with another person that's also watching a fire in a different quadrant of Yellowstone, and kind of uncovering your own past, what happened to you, and why you're there, and what happened. But there's no way to die. There's no like, there's no there's no objectives that you can fail at. It's basically a walking simulator where you pick up things and talk on a walkie-talkie with this other person. And what happened on Steam was that it was selling for like $15, and this person was like, "Yeah, I got this game. I beat it in about 3 hours, and I kind of want a refund because I could do something else with this $15. I mean, I love the game, but what should I do?" And the developer actually responded to that entry. At the end, the person said, I'm not gonna get the refund. But it's really weird that even in this digital age, we still haven't found a way to assign value to something that you can't touch and feel, right? And that's something that everyone in the App Store struggles with, especially premium game makers. Is that apparently it's so difficult. I can buy a $700 device, but I can't sell a game for 99 cents without people feeling like they've been cheated if they don't like it. And I'm hoping, as time goes on and we get more digital things, people just are okay with it. But that's been a struggle that I've seen personally myself.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's in that broader class of we're engaging in a new forms of commerce now, like that have been enabled by certain types of technology, and there's no common sense yet, right? It's so new. We haven't had time to develop. Like, you remember how people used to leave their ringers on their mobile phones on when they were walking around,
right?
And you basically never hear. I mean, I basically never hear a phone go off anymore.
You don't hear the custom ringtones that they had.
Yeah, but when they first came out, people would do that, and it takes a while for codes and conventions to be built. But one thing we've definitely experienced at Leanpub is, we surface to people that refunds are 2 clicks away. That means that, yes, you can, if you want to, you can buy a book and download it, and then you can get your refund. I mean, obviously we don't encourage that, but it's rare.
Yeah, and you don't sweat it. You try not to sweat that either.
Well, you can't. I mean, with BitTorrent and whatever, you can't. Right. It is. I mean, this is my personal opinion. People in this industry obviously have many different opinions about it, and as we're talking about, people are still working it out. Right. But my view is that, especially if you're a creator, right? If you're creating things, you should spend your time creating things. And you're not, even if it were possible to kind of diminish the pirating of your work, you're not the right person to be doing that. Right? You should be writing your book. You should be thinking about your novel. You should be thinking about your game. You should be working on your song, or whatever it is. Yeah. And just really genuinely just leave that out of your headspace and concentrate on being better at what you're doing.
Yeah, and for me, it goes back to the empathy aspect too. Someone downloads my book or pirates it. It's like maybe they can't afford it, or even with my game, I had people on Reddit when I would give away promo codes, or say I give away promo codes like, hey, this promo code doesn't work in South Africa. I can't use it here, and I really can't buy your game either because there's no really good means for me to buy something because I don't have a bank account or credit card. Or it'd be a kid. It's like I'm 13 years old. Like I get an allowance. I can't do this. So sometimes it's like, yeah, I mean, just give them the benefit of the doubt and say there's a reason why they can't shell over the cash.
I couldn't agree more. It's interesting. The best-selling Leanpub book in 2015, in terms of copies and revenue, which are 2 separate calculations, right? Right. What had a minimum price of 0. Right. So the book that made the most money you could get for free. Mm-hmm. This isn't And as I like to say, this isn't us being like precious. Like it's serious kind of business model, right? That like giving that flexibility to people is actually beneficial. And definitely, my personal belief is that spending time and energy in attacking people is really bad. That is a counterproductive activity. Yeah. And like, it's kind of like, I mean, it's interesting you're saying about like they kind of hide refunds at the App Store, but it used to be, when I was a kid, if you like, got your remote controlled car for Christmas and, or whatever, or your birthday, and it didn't work and you took it back, you had to like engage in a negotiation and like prove that you didn't do it, stand in line, and then they'd treat you in a sinister fashion, like maybe you were trying to hoodwink them or something like that. Right. The last time I tried to return something was like at I don't know, a Best Buy or something, and they're just like, okay, got the receipt, and and I handed it over, and they gave me my money back, and it was like that's the way they saved themselves so much money and made a happy customer by not being jerks about the exchange of money and goods. It seems to be something that we're hopefully we'll get to the point where it's just total common sense that like being negative to everybody, like for example, DRM on an ebook, for example, like treating all of your potential customers like you think they might be bad actors, is just a terrible approach. And the people who are kind are going to win the hard ass war, which is really interesting. Just moving on, I actually wanted to ask you a couple of questions about your book.
Sure.
So, Surviving the App Store, it's a great title, by the way. You did a really interesting thing where you had this sort of like very early release where you had a promotion, where it's like you can get it for a big discount if you buy it now, but there isn't any content in it yet. And I was wondering how that worked out.
It worked. It was the craziest thing. So I did the free thing. I basically had just it was one page, and it was like, this is kind of what my table of contents would be, and I had a hello world, and I set the price to free and $4.99, and I was like, I tweeted about it. I had the cover. I did my cover in Photoshop. And I'm terrible at it. You can actually see the progression. I've got some tweets with the old cover on there, and I've got some feedback on that too, which was cool. But I put it out there, and I was like, somebody talk me out of this, please. Somebody talk me out of writing a book. And then right off the bat, I got like insta-buys. I got like 5 or 6 people paying me the $5 for the book. And I'm like, you guys are crazy. I don't have any pages and you're buying my book. What's wrong with you? And then from there, I was like, okay, well, let me take my blog. My blog is still up, so you can read at least the initial response that I had. It's like a 14-month diary of everything that I went through. So you can still read that. And I was like, okay, let me copy and paste that in there in the book, and then read through it, and then have a postmortem on my postmortems. So then that was kind of like the first exclusive content that I added to the book. And I kept it free during that time period still, and just said, okay, here's the update to the book, and I kept on getting good feedback and good sales from it. So it's surreal that I can sell something. I can sell a promise, right? That I've built up. I built up at least some credibility that says, I promise to do this. I have no pages. Give me $5, and people did it, and it was just awesome. It's a really great feeling.
That's great. I was wondering, actually, the answer might be in there, but why did you choose to use Leanpub rather than any of the other platforms you could have used?
I think like that was the one that I heard the most about. And another thing was like the GitHub integration was my primary point, was that I could just have markdown files and have the GitHub stuff, and it just kind of worked for me. So that's the model that I went with.
Okay, so the markdown was kind of a selling point.
Yeah, the markdown and the GitHub integration was the big selling point for me. And a part of me was like, oh, I can make the repo public, but I decided to keep it private, just because during my editing phase and whatnot. And they can get the book. If you really tried hard, you could probably go through all my Reddit entries and kind of glean some aspects of it. But at that point, it's like, yeah, email me and I'll give you a free copy of the book, right? So just do that. Another interesting angle that I had with the book was, I'm still playing around with it, especially if I get some more traction, is to keep it free. Right now it's $4.99, the minimum price, but I might make it free again because it's free because it's publicity for my games, and that's where my income really comes from is the games themselves. So I've been trying to think of ways where is there a service that I can set up to where if you email me your iTunes receipt and I see that you've bought my game, that I could give you the book for free, or some variation of that. But there's no public API to get sales information from Apple. But those are the kind of like weird things that I'm thinking about right now, is that how can I drive more sales to my game, and then you get a lot of the 90%, the other 90% for free. So just letting my wheels spin on that. I think it's doable. I think it is actually really doable, but I just have to see if I can figure it out.
That you could do it the other way around, where if someone bought your book, you could give them the game for free?
I get 100 promotion codes, so per release. So I could do it 100 times, but that's where it stops, right? So I was thinking about, man, I could just set up some daemon process on an AWS instance where you email this daemon process and then it parses the receipt and then gets you a coupon code, gives you the coupon reference so you can download the book for free. And I'm sure people, I can, and then you start thinking about, well, they might be able to forge the receipt, and it's like you can't start thinking about that kind of stuff. You just have to, concentrate on those things. But and I think I emailed you before about this, was a means to say subscribe to my newsletter and get a discount on the book, and just facilitate that through Leanpub. That'd be great. And different ideas there too. So I use MailChimp right now, and trying to figure out ways to integrate. Potentially, if you subscribe, then send off this subsequent thing to give you the coupon code for the book. Different ideas there too.
It's actually my sort of last question related to that is the theme of your book is dealing, and your posts is dealing with Apple,
right,
as an iOS product maker. And I was wondering if you could just for a couple minutes talk about what's that experience like.
It's definitely don't call us, we'll call you, right? There's two sides of it. So the editorial team is like this untouchable group. Developers don't have direct access to them. So I have kind of like a liaison to the editorial team that will advocate for me. And the good thing about these liaisons, they're human beings. Like, you can talk to them and send out a quick email saying that, hey man, I'm doing this, right? You don't have to worry about being all really formal with them and everything. So, but it is basically a black hole. You send things over and you get very little feedback coming back on the other end, outside of the Thursday during lunchtime Cupertino, where you get to see if anything really happened. But I guess, they're in a position where they can do that.
And when you say editorial, is that both like approving the app or a new release and positioning in the App Store?
This is strictly for featuring, so curation of feature content. So as far as like the ranking system, it's pretty much completely calculated off of the number of downloads you have. So from what I've seen, it's about a 4 to 5 day moving average of your downloads. So like getting 600 to 700 downloads a day on the premium App Store will put you in the top 150 games. Getting 6,000 to 7,000 downloads a day in the free App Store will put you in the top 150. So it's like you could calculate it very easily. Well, if you have the entire range, which I do. But yeah, the entire feature process is 100% curated. There's no automatic engine. There are people that look at apps, interact with developers, of course, interact with AAA companies, and they figure out what they want to feature and what they want to push, and they try to curate that content. And I think that's where the value is in the App Store. I haven't done much Google Play yet. I'm porting the game over right now. But as far as Apple, yeah, there's a lot of work that goes into getting good content out there. And frankly, it's good content. So when you see something featured, it's worth buying. Like, I can strongly say that pretty strongly, at least if it's not a AAA company, right? If it's some unknown company, if it's not Squaresoft, Kim Kardashian, King, Warner Brothers, buy it. You'll enjoy whatever it is.
Oh, well, that's really great to know that that detail about that, and that they're doing a good job over there. Because sometimes, as a sort of non-expert consumer, it's kind of hard to know. My last question is, if you could ask us to build one feature or solve one problem that you encountered at Leanpub, what would you choose?
I think it'd be the newsletter thing, right? If I can collect an email for a discount, huge. I think that'd be pretty big for me.
So what do you mean? Can you say maybe a little bit more about that? Because currently we have a feature where when someone's buying a book, they can choose to share their email address with you.
Right.
And you're saying you want something more than that.
Right. If they share their email address, I give them a discount.
Oh, I see. Yeah, got it. Okay, understood.
Right.
Yeah, that's something we thought about before. Yeah. Okay.
So that would be really cool from my perspective, because I've got, the blog, and the more people that I have on the blog, I can subsequently have, different entries around development, game development. I can, talk about my Twitch channel if I want to start that up, screencasts, and of course, cross promote my games. So that'd be, pretty valuable, and I do believe I give good content, right, outside of the book.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Actually, it's on the theme of things have changed because of technology and the types of products that we can create and sell to people and that people can buy. And there's a certain sort of category of author who comes to us thinking that by default you get a customer's email address,
right?
Which to me is just like that would never occur to me that, like, if I'm buying a book, that the creator of it is going to get my email address. Now,
yeah, that's personal.
Yeah, well, exactly. But it's curious. Like I said, like, we're working out the codes, right? There are some people, like, especially people who live in the kind of newsletter marketing world, often are like, well, that's what I'm building, right? Is my email. Right. And we're hearing things about, like, Sanders's email news list basically is this, like, hugely valuable thing that the Clinton team is trying to get him to hand over and stuff. And so there are people who think, like, from the email out, right? And yeah, it's something we encounter, but definitely giving people the option to share their email address with an author is something we really like, because some people we want to encourage people to establish a relationship with each other.
And out of all the subscriptions, only one person has opted out, right? So everyone's been really good about giving their email.
On that note, you actually have to opt in. That means everybody but one person has actively opted in. So that says a lot. Okay, well, thanks a lot for taking your time to talk about this. It was really interesting chat. And thanks for being a Leanpub author too.
Oh, I love it.